My name is Michael. I am 40 years old. I live in the suburbs of a large American city and work as a sales manager in a technology company. Until recently, my life seemed prosperous and measured to me. Every morning I wake up at 6:30, make coffee for two, and fry toast. My wife Sarah loves crispy toast with avocado and egg, and I try to please her with small pleasant things before the start of the working day. We have been married for 12 years. Over these years, we have developed our own way of life. On weekdays, we both work. In the evening, we cook dinner together or order pizza. And on weekends, we spend quietly. Sometimes we meet with friends or watch movies at home. We don't have children. It just so happened that we put this question aside, carried away by work and freedom without obligations. Sometimes I wondered if we wanted them at all, but it seems that we were both happy with life together. We were sure that we would have time if we decided, and for now we enjoyed each other's company and the peace of family life without children. We always tried to find time for each other. Until recently, I was sure that we had a strong and honest union based on trust and mutual support. That Monday, everything was as usual. I made breakfast that morning, and Sarah and I were sitting in the kitchen sipping coffee. She was scrolling through her phone while I told her a funny story that happened at work last week. Sarah was smiling, but she seemed a little distracted. I noticed the slight shadows under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept well. "Staying up late writing your report again?" I asked sympathetically, putting my mug down. She had mentioned several times lately about an urgent project that required her to work in the evenings. "Yes, a little," she answered and rubbed her eyes. "A client from Europe. They call closer tonight because of the time difference. We had to call each other." "I see. Maybe we should go to bed early today. You look tired," I suggested. Sarah nodded and brushed a strand of light brown hair from her face. She was 38, still as attractive as the day I met her. Sometimes I thought with pride about how beautiful and intelligent she was, and how lucky I was. She smiled at me a little warmer and touched my hand on the table. "Thanks for caring. I think I really should go to bed earlier." I covered her hand with my own for a few seconds, letting her know that I cared about her well-being. A wave of tenderness rose inside me. Despite the years together, I still loved these quiet family moments, breakfast together, the usual morning ritual when we discuss plans for the day or share some little things. After breakfast, we went off to work. It had been a busy day. Meetings followed one after another, and I had no time to get distracted. It was only around 5 in the evening, when I was getting ready to go home, that I remembered that I wanted to call Sarah and find out what time she would be free. Usually we called each other in the evening if one of us was late. I dialed her number, but the call was dropped after a few rings. Strangely, I didn't pay any attention to it. She was probably at a meeting or already on her way home. Arriving home around 5:30, I found the house empty. Sarah usually gets home before me at 5 unless she's in a rush. I figured she might have been late at work because of that project. As a thoughtful gesture, I decided to cook dinner myself, a simple pasta with vegetables and chicken, one of our favorite weekday meals. As I was chopping vegetables, the front door slammed. I looked out of the kitchen and saw Sarah. She walked in quickly, holding a purse and a bag with some folders in her hands. She was wearing a gray pantsuit, a formal look, although they usually have casual wear on Mondays. Her face looked tired. "Hello," I called out to her, smiling. "How was your day?" "Hi," she replied, her voice a little muffled. She took off her shoes and walked into the kitchen, giving me a quick peck on the cheek. "It's been a rough day. How are you?" "Nothing good either, just meetings," I responded, continuing to stir the vegetables in the pan. I decided to make pasta. "Great, I'm starving today." She tried to smile and sank into a chair at the kitchen island. I glanced at her folders. "Work from home again?" "What?" "Oh, yeah," Sarah looked at the bag of folders, as if she'd forgotten she was holding them. "I'll have to finish up some work tonight." "I see. Maybe you should rest a bit after dinner. Work is not a wolf, it won't run away into the forest," I joked softly. Sarah smiled slightly, but her eyes were downcast. She ate silently throughout dinner, clearly lost in her thoughts. I told her the latest office news, but she responded sluggishly. An awkward silence filled the kitchen toward the end of the meal. We used to chatter about anything and everything, but now it was as if we were searching for topics. After dinner, Sarah took her files to her office and said she had to work for a few hours. I nodded, although a little disappointed inside. I'd been hoping to spend the evening together, maybe watch the latest episode of our favorite show. Instead, I was left alone in front of the TV, mindlessly flipping through channels. When the clock passed 10, I looked into the office. Sarah was sitting at the computer, her eyes wearily squinting at the screen. "Are you finishing soon?" I asked quietly from the doorway. She flinched, as if I had frightened her, and abruptly closed some documents on the screen. "Oh, you scared me." "What?" she asked again. "It's late. Maybe we should just forget about this job. Go to bed, and you can finish it tomorrow morning with a fresh look." Sarah ran her hand over her face. "Yes, you're right. I have no more strength." She stood up from her desk. I noticed that the phone next to the keyboard had gone dark, as if she had done something quickly on it when I walked in. Perhaps she had simply pressed a button, but for some reason this small detail made me wary. However, I immediately pulled myself up. Why on earth would she hide something on her phone? Most likely, she was texting one of her colleagues about a project and did not want me to be distracted by her work problems. We went to bed in tense silence. Sarah turned to the wall almost as soon as she lay down. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, feeling inexplicably anxious. It had been a tough day, but usually my wife's presence calmed me down. Today, it was as if there was an invisible wall between us. I convinced myself that it was just stress and fatigue. It's not like every day is perfectly harmonious. We had hardly argued lately, and there had been no reason to. Maybe a couple of weeks ago, we had a little row over something trivial. I forgot to buy milk on the way home from work, and Sarah had to drink her coffee without it in the morning. She got a little angry then, but an hour later we made up and laughed about it. Nothing serious to worry about. Otherwise, our relationship seemed stable and warm to me. I don't remember any grievances or omissions in the last few months, so this strange feeling that had appeared now made me wary. Where did this sudden wall between us come from? Before I fell asleep, I briefly wondered if something was bothering Sarah, but she wasn't telling me. Maybe the problems at work were more serious than they seemed, or maybe she was mad at me over something trivial. These thoughts swirled around in my head until I finally fell asleep without an answer. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Usually, we would chat in the kitchen or bathroom in the morning, sharing our plans for the day. But that Tuesday, Sarah barely spoke. She came downstairs already dressed for work, her hair carefully done. I was pouring coffee into a thermos, getting ready to go to the office. "Good morning," I tried to start a conversation, handing her a mug of coffee. "Morning," she answered briefly. She looked collected and slightly distant. I noticed that she had chosen her best navy dress and low-heeled shoes, although she usually dressed more casually midweek. However, perhaps she had important client meetings scheduled. Sarah took a sip of coffee and glanced at the phone on the table next to her. I was eager to somehow diffuse the situation after yesterday's tension. "How did you sleep?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. "It's fine," she answered without looking up. I dared to approach and gently hug her shoulders. "Sar, are you okay? I see you're tired and not yourself these last few days. Maybe something happened." Sarah tensed slightly under my arm. For a second, I even thought she wanted to wriggle out of my embrace, but she held back and simply said, "It's okay, Mike. I just really have a lot of work to do. It'll pass." "Really? Maybe I can help with something." I didn't let up, trying to meet her gaze. She finally looked at me, her green eyes flashing with fatigue and irritation. "Sorry. I know I'm not being my best. It's just, my head is full of reports." "Help? I don't think you can reduce my deadline," she tried to joke, but the smile came out weak. "Okay," I let go of her shoulders. "If you want to talk or need help, I'm here, okay?" "Okay," she answered more softly. We walked out of the house in near silence. Usually we took turns starting the car from the garage, but today Sarah hurried out first, citing an early meeting. I kissed her goodbye on the cheek before she got into her car. Her lips were cool, and she avoided eye contact. A minute later, her sedan pulled out of the driveway. I sighed and got into my car. I was in a bad mood. Driving the familiar route to the office, I tried to figure out what I was doing wrong. Maybe I should give her some time and not push her. If she was stressed at work, my questions would only irritate her. Perhaps the best solution would be to distract myself with my own affairs and let her come to her senses on her own. Things were getting busy at the office, but thoughts of Sarah were still on my mind. During my lunch break, I decided to send her a message to support her. I typed a short text. Love you. Hang in there at work. We'll open a bottle of wine tonight and relax. I felt a little relieved as I pressed send. The answer didn't come right away. Only after almost an hour did the phone vibrate. Thank you. Love you too. Sorry for my mood. I'll be there at 7 o'clock tonight. After reading the answer, I smiled. Perhaps everything really is just because of work, and in the evening I'll be able to return to the usual atmosphere. However, in the evening the situation went differently. I returned home around 6, having bought a bottle of her favorite Chardonnay and a selection of cheeses on the way. I wanted to arrange a small surprise. I expected that she would be home by 7, as she had written. By 7:30, Sarah was still missing. I had laid a nice tablecloth on the kitchen table, got out some glasses, but I was sitting alone. At 7:45, I called her, but she didn't pick up. 5 minutes later, a text came. Sorry, I'm late at work. Don't wait for dinner. My excitement instantly faded. I replied, It's okay. Will you be late? And sent a smiley face, trying to hide my disappointment. I don't know yet. I have the key, if anything, came the short answer. It was as if someone had let the air out of the happy balloon in my chest. I looked at the set table. The wine was getting warm. The candle I had lit for her arrival was burning in vain. A sharp stab of resentment made me stand up and start putting everything back. There must be something urgent at work, I told myself. But then why did I feel so uncomfortable? By 9 o'clock in the evening, I was sitting in front of the TV, unable to find a place for myself, a glass of white wine standing almost untouched. I kept glancing at my phone. Unkind thoughts were creeping through my head. What if she lied to me about work? But to whom and why? No, nonsense. Work, of course. Around 9:30, I heard the sound of an engine and headlights outside the living room window. Sarah was back. I glanced at my watch and tried to pull myself together to hide my irritation. After all, she hadn't been late by choice, had she? The front door opened and I heard her take off her shoes. I walked out into the hallway. Sarah looked tired and guilty. I'm sorry it happened, she said quietly, hanging up her coat. The client sent some edits out of the blue, and we spent the whole evening sorting it out with the team. I understand, I answered just as quietly, trying to hide my disappointment. How are you? Have you eaten anything? Grabbed a pizza at the office. I hope you weren't expecting dinner. She peeked out from behind the door, casting a quick glance at the kitchen, where there was no longer a trace of my spoiled surprise. No, I ate, I lied. I didn't feel like eating at all after 2 glasses of wine on an empty stomach, but I didn't want to tell her about it, so as not to upset her even more. Okay, she nodded and, looking down, walked into the living room. I'm terribly tired. I'll go straight to bed, okay? Of course, go ahead, I sighed. I didn't want to argue or make a scene with her. She was obviously exhausted, but while I washed a glass in the kitchen, disappointment was scratching at my soul. The plan for the evening had collapsed. I turned off the light and went upstairs to the bedroom. Sarah was already lying under the blanket, facing the wall, her phone lying next to her on the nightstand. I sat down on the edge of the bed, pulling off my shirt. Are you okay? I asked quietly in the semi-darkness. Aha, was all that could be heard, muffled. Normally at such moments I would have tried to put my arm around her, maybe massage her shoulders, but now her closed nature stopped me. I didn't want to receive another cold refusal. I lay down next to her, not touching her, and stared into the darkness. The nasty thought stirred in my head again. Maybe she wasn't at work this evening. Our city is full of restaurants and bars where you can spend time. No, enough. What made me think that? I tried to push these doubts away. I had to trust my wife. We had never deceived each other. But why then did I feel so uneasy? That night I tossed and turned, trying to calm my anxiety. Suspicious thoughts came and went, but I did not dare to think through any of them. In the end, I fell into an uneasy, shallow sleep, never finding peace. After a few days, the tension between Sarah and me seemed to ease a little. We tried to act as usual, although there was a certain caution in every word. I thought she also sensed that something was wrong. However, I decided not to push any further and to give her space as I had planned. Maybe I really should have relaxed. Friday was a relatively free day. I had a canceled external meeting in the afternoon, and I found myself near Sarah's office. We work in different parts of the city, but today a chance had brought me close to her building. The weather was sunny, and I had a spontaneous desire to do something nice for Sarah, pick her up from work early, and go out for a bite to eat or a coffee together. I thought she would appreciate the surprise. In the past, we sometimes had spontaneous meetings in the middle of the day, and it always cheered us both up. I parked near the modern office building where Sarah's advertising agency was located. It was about 1:30 in the afternoon. In the lobby of the first floor, I stopped a security guard I knew. "Hi, Frank. I'm here to see Sarah Miller. Is she having lunch by any chance?" The security guard recognized me. I had stopped by to pick up my wife a couple of times before. "Hi, Mike. Sarah's not here. They seem to have gone out for lunch." "I see. But don't you know where?" I asked, trying not to show my disappointment. Frank shrugged. "I can't say for sure. There's a new cafe that opened on the corner. A lot of people go there." "Thank you." I thanked him and went outside. I noticed the new cafe on the corner right away, a nice little place with glass windows. And through those windows I saw them. Sarah was unmistakable, sitting at a table near the window. Across from her sat a man, leaning forward in an interested pose. I squinted, trying to see him. Dark hair, a neat beard. I think I'd seen him once when I picked Sarah up after work. He was probably the new analyst, Kevin. My heart skipped a beat. They were talking animatedly about something. Sarah was smiling slightly, although she looked tired. At one point, Kevin said something, and she suddenly laughed quietly, covering her mouth with her hand. I froze, watching them from behind a parked car. From the outside, they looked like ordinary colleagues at lunch. Or like a couple. I caught myself thinking this and felt ashamed. Why did I decide that we were a couple? Just because my wife smiles at another man. I know that she is a sociable person and a colleague, too nothing unusual. And yet jealousy began to stir inside, scratching my chest disgustingly. A few minutes later, I saw Sarah get up from the table. Kevin stood up too. They headed for the exit. I instinctively retreated around the corner of the building, not wanting to be seen. The door of the cafe opened, and I heard fragments of phrases. "I'm glad I could help," the man said. "I couldn't have done it without you," Sarah replied. I peeked out just a little. Kevin smiled at Sarah, and she gave him a surprise goodbye hug. It was a small, friendly hug, no more than a second, but my chest tightened. Then they parted ways. He waved at her and headed in the opposite direction, and Sarah headed back to the office, holding a takeaway coffee. I stood around the corner, trying to calm my racing heart. The hug. Maybe he had just supported her at work, and she had cheered him up in gratitude. After all, she had said to herself that he had helped her with her calculations. It all made sense. But the burning discomfort had not gone away. I realized that I suddenly didn't want to meet her now. My plan had suddenly collapsed. If I went out to meet her now, I would have to pretend I hadn't seen anything or ask awkward questions right away. Nothing good would come of that. I decided to go back to my office and talk to Sarah in the evening. The whole way back I was torn between the two of me. Half of me was telling myself that I was an idiot for being jealous of my wife over a mere coworker over a 1-second hug. The other half was stubbornly whispering that there was more to her smile with Kevin than just politeness, and the way they leaned toward each other over the table. I shook my head as if trying to get those images out of my head. When I returned home in the evening, Sarah was already there. She had changed into her house leggings and tunic. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun. The kettle was boiling on the stove. Apparently, she had just arrived and decided to have some tea. "Hello," I said calmly, taking off my jacket. "Hi," she looked at me a little warily, as if she felt my tension. I followed her into the kitchen, my insides seething, but I tried to remain neutral. "How's your day?" I asked, opening the refrigerator under the pretext of finding a snack. "Fine," she replied, taking out a mug. "Tired, as usual." "Have you had lunch at the new cafe on the corner?" I asked casually, watching her reaction. Sarah's hand, holding the teapot, shook just a little. She glanced at me quickly. Yes, I came in with a colleague." "With Kevin?" I asked directly. Her eyes narrowed as she slowly put the kettle on. "Have you been following me?" There was a sharp edge to her voice. "No, of course not." I raised my hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I was just nearby on business and wanted to invite you to lunch. I went into the office and they said you were in a cafe. That's all." "I see." Sarah looked down and turned away, pouring boiling water into a mug. "Yeah, I was with Kevin. He was helping me with a project, so we decided to go for a walk and grab a bite to eat. Nothing special." Her tone was defensive. I felt my irritation growing. "I'm not saying it's anything special," I just asked. "No, you didn't just ask." She turned sharply to me, her eyes flashing. "You ask with such an implication, as if you suspected something." The directness of her words left me at a loss. "I suspect? No. I was just surprised that you didn't write to me and tell me. Mike, I have lunch my personal time. I don't have to account for every minute." Her voice became tired and irritated. "What's wrong with me having lunch with a colleague?" I started getting angry too. "Nothing. Nothing like that. Except that lately you've been acting as if I'm a stranger to you." "What?" She widened her eyes. "What makes you think that? Because you are always late somewhere, always tired, and keep quiet. And now you react like that to a simple question." I blurted out, forgetting about my intention to remain calm. Sarah shook her head, her lips pressed tightly together. "Amazing. So if I work hard and get tired, I immediately act strange. Forgive me for not having the energy for joy and chatter," she said venomously. "That's not what I mean," I continued to press, "but that you've distanced yourself. I can see it." She fell silent, looking into her mug. Then, more quietly, "I have nothing to tell you. Everything is fine." This phrase completely drove me crazy. Everything is fine after everything I saw and felt. Really? Then why were you hugging Kevin? I blurted out, not expecting such directness from myself. Sarah's face seemed to have turned to stone. The kitchen was silent, broken only by the ticking of the clock above the table. "You were following," she quietly stated, tears of anger or resentment glistening in her eyes. I didn't understand. I didn't. I started, but stopped. How could I explain that I was standing and peeping around the corner? The situation itself looked ugly. "I saw you by accident. I was leaving the building and noticed you." "Wonderful." Sarah put down her mug without taking a sip of tea. "Well, since you saw everything, what are you thinking?" "That I—" Her voice wavered and she bit her lip. I suddenly realized that I had crossed a line. Accusations of infidelity, for which I had essentially no evidence, could hurt us both. "I don't think anything." "Well, I do, but I don't know what exactly," I exhaled, feeling a mixture of guilt and pain. "It's just that lately I've been feeling like I'm losing you, and then I see you happily chatting with someone else." "With a colleague," she snapped. A tear rolled down her cheek, but her voice remained angry. "Yes, with a colleague who helped me clear away the rubble while my own husband stood around the corner and spied." "I wasn't spying." Of course, she wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. You know, Mike, this is beyond the pale. The cold, distant tone with which she said my name seemed to burn me from the inside. What do you mean by that? I asked hoarsely. It's nothing. Sarah picked up her mug and poured the water into the sink. Forget it. She walked past me, heading towards the kitchen exit. Sarah, I tried to stop her. No, Michael, that's enough. She stopped in the doorway without turning around. I don't have the strength to discuss this now. I'm going to bed. I was left alone in the kitchen. There was no point in arguing further. I felt a lump rising in my throat. I had just practically accused my wife of cheating on me, and it seemed she was not going to forgive me. That night, we slept with our backs to each other. Sarah said nothing more. I lay awake until almost dawn, feeling terrible. It seemed as if I had driven another nail into the lid of our marriage, perhaps with hasty suspicions. But the strange thing was that, although I was ashamed of my behavior, my doubts did not dissipate. In the depths of my soul, despite all the assurances of my mind, there continued to smolder a suspicion that it was not just fatigue and stress. Saturday morning was tense. It had been only a day since our row about Kevin, and the wound had not yet healed. We had barely spoken. I woke early, but lay staring at the ceiling. I could hear Sarah breathing calmly next to me. It seemed she was still asleep, despite the restless night. When she stirred and sat up in bed, I pretended to be asleep, unsure how to start the morning after such an evening. A few minutes later, I heard her get up and go to the bathroom. I got up too, headed down to the kitchen, and began making breakfast, simple eggs and toast. The aroma of coffee was already wafting through the kitchen when Sarah came down. She looked pale and distant. "Good morning," I said quietly, placing a plate of toast on the table. "Hello," she answered just as quietly, sitting down at the table. We ate almost in silence. The atmosphere was awkward. It seemed that both of us were afraid to say too much. I knew that I had to apologize for yesterday. I had really gone too far, making a scene. But something was getting in the way, either wounded pride or still smoldering suspicion. Finally, I gathered my courage. "Sar, forgive me for yesterday. I was wrong to attack you like that." She looked up at me, a hint of weariness in her eyes. "I'm sorry too," she replied quietly. "Let's just forget about it." "Go ahead," I agreed, although I understood perfectly well that it wouldn't be so easy to forget. After breakfast, Sarah announced, "I need to run some business this afternoon." "On business?" I asked again, trying to sound neutral. "Yes, I promised to meet my friend. Remember Linda? We've been planning to go shopping for a long time." She spoke in a casual tone, but her eyes avoided mine. I had a morbid suspicion left over from yesterday's conversation, and now she raised her head again. However, I nodded. "Of course, I remember. You wanted to meet last month, I think."
Yeah.
We kept putting it off. Sarah got up from the table and started clearing her plate. "So I'll go to her by 2 o'clock. "Okay," I tried to stay calm. "I need to take the trash to the dump myself and do a couple of things in the yard." We each went our separate ways. Sarah went upstairs to get ready, and I started tidying up the garage to keep myself busy. The thought was pounding in my head. Was she really going to Linda's? After yesterday's scandal, I decided not to pester her with questions. But the worm of doubt would not subside. Around 1 o'clock, Sarah came out of the bedroom, already dressed. She was wearing jeans and a light sweater, sneakers, a normal casual outfit. However, she had put on a little more makeup than would be required for a Saturday shopping trip. Lightly lined eyes, gloss on her lips. I noted this to myself, but said nothing. "I'm leaving," she said, looking into my living room, where I was checking my email on my laptop. "Okay. Say hello to Linda," I replied as casually as I could. "Of course," Sarah nodded and left. I looked out the window and saw her car pull out of the yard. My heart sank. Was she being honest with me now? Or was she hiding something again? For about 10 minutes, I paced from room to room, restless. A voice inside me kept telling me that I should trust my wife, especially after I had wrongly accused her. But another voice kept reminding me, What if she really was lying? Could I forgive myself if I closed my eyes again and let myself be deceived? I decided to check anyway. Linda's phone number was in my address book. We had crossed paths a couple of times at general meetings, and somehow it had survived. My hands were shaking a little when I dialed the number. After several beeps, a surprised female voice was heard. Hello? Hi, Linda. It's Michael, Sarah's husband, I began, a little hesitantly. Sorry to bother you. Look, I've been trying to call Sarah, but she's not answering. She's at your place, right? You were supposed to meet today, weren't you? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Michael, hi. No, Sarah isn't with me, Linda finally responded. Yes, we wanted to meet, but I can't today. I'm sick and staying home. I wrote to her yesterday that I would reschedule the meeting. My ears were blocked. I could barely hear what Linda said next. I hope she's okay. She's probably just busy with other things since I canceled. Is everything okay? Yes, yes, everything is fine, I croaked. Thank you, Linda. Get well soon. I turned off the call, barely containing the trembling in my fingers. For a few seconds, I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring into space, dumbfounded. She lied. Sarah had lied to me outright. Linda had even told her that she couldn't meet. So my wife had deliberately used her friend as cover, knowing that there would be no meeting. Anger and pain flared up at the same time. Blood pounded in her temples. Where had Sarah really gone? And with whom? I rushed upstairs almost automatically. Everything in the bedroom was neatly tidied up. The usual bottles of perfume and creams lay on the dressing table. I opened the closet. Her everyday clothes were in place. A couple of dresses and covers hung in the corner. I suddenly realized that I was looking for at least some kind of clue, like a detective in a movie. I stopped, took a deep breath, and let it out. Going through my wife's things. Has it come to this? But she lied. My inner voice said, I needed to know the truth. I carefully pulled out the top drawer of her dresser. There was lingerie, neatly folded sets. My gaze caught on a lacy red bra with a tag. New. Next to it were panties, also new, judging by the tags still on. I had never seen anything like that on her. Sarah never wore red lingerie in her everyday life. She preferred classic, calm tones. This outfit looked bold and provocative. My mouth went dry. When did she manage to buy this? And most importantly, who would wear it? I closed the drawer, feeling my hands shaking. It felt like the whole world was shaking. Just a couple of weeks ago, I couldn't even imagine that I would be rummaging through my wife's things, looking for evidence of her infidelity. My heart was skipping a beat, then pounding. Trying to calm down, I sat on the edge of the bed. What should I say now? Call her and ask her directly where she is. She will most likely lie about something. After the lie about her friend, I could no longer trust a single word she said. The picture was becoming clearer. Emotional coldness, late returns, excuses about work, hugs with a colleague, now outright lies, and hidden new underwear. Even if I didn't know all the details, a certainty was born inside Sarah as someone. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the floor. Finally, I heard the front door slam downstairs. Looking at my watch, I realized that more than 3 hours had passed. Sarah had returned. Realizing what was happening, I quickly stood up and left the bedroom, trying to look as calm as possible, although inside everything was boiling. I went downstairs and found her in the kitchen. She was putting bags on the table, apparently with groceries. Hi, she called over her shoulder as she heard my footsteps. Hi, I replied. How was your walk with Linda? Sarah turned slightly, her face wearing her usual calm smile. It was fine. We went shopping, sat in a cafe. I had a good time. Her calmness made me feel like I was falling apart inside. Was it that easy for her to lie to my face? I clenched my fists under the table, but tried to speak evenly. Glad to hear it. Is Linda better now that she was able to go out? You said she was feeling unwell. Sarah froze for a split second. I saw her blink rapidly. Well, she felt better today, she answered after a pause. She had a slight runny nose, but nothing serious. I was almost shaking with indignation. She didn't even try to come up with a plausible version, she just lied right away. However, I forced myself to smile as casually as possible. I see. Well, it's good that you managed to catch up. Sarah frowned slightly, apparently surprised that I was reacting so calmly. Yes, was all she said. I didn't ask any more questions. I was afraid I would lose my temper if I continued. I made the excuse that I needed to finish cleaning the garage and left her to unpack her groceries. Locked in the garage, I slammed my fist into the wooden workbench post, sending a sharp pain through my elbow. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the storm inside. I no longer had vague guesses, but a firm conviction. Sarah was deceiving me, and I had to find out what was really going on. On Sunday, Sarah and I barely spoke. She spent most of the day in the garden with a book or going to yoga, and I was busy with long chores, trying to release my pent-up anxiety into physical work. The house was sparkling clean, the lawn was mown, but my thoughts were not any more organized. We exchanged only the usual phrases. What are you having for lunch? I'll put the laundry to do the washing. It seemed that each of us had retreated into our own shells. I had an unbearable urge to pounce on her with questions. Where were you yesterday? With whom? Why did you lie? But I held back. So far I had no evidence other than her lies, and another groundless scandal would only push the truth further away. On Monday morning, everything went on as usual, as if nothing had happened. Sarah was getting ready for work, looking calm, even a little lively. She chose a strict dark green blouse and pencil skirt, and I caught myself thinking that she had been dressing especially carefully in recent days. Previously, on Mondays, she could wear jeans and a pullover if she didn't have important meetings. But now every day was like going out. She noticed my gaze when I entered the kitchen. Is something wrong? She asked, adjusting her earring. No, everything's fine, I turned away, pretending to be busy with the coffee machine. At breakfast, she tried to start a conversation, said something about the upcoming week, about some big project coming up at work. I listened with half an ear, noting only individual details. For example, she mentioned, I might have to go to a conference this weekend. I don't know for sure yet. The boss wants someone from the department to be there. I nodded, not showing how my heart sank. A conference on the weekend, another opportunity, but I didn't show it. Okay, tell me if you definitely decide. When she left, I realized I needed to talk or I would explode. I couldn't concentrate at work. My mind was occupied only with what was happening at home. During my lunch break, I called my best friend, David, and asked to meet that evening. David and I had known each other since high school. He had been the best man at our wedding, and we had remained close over the years. I had never hidden my problems from him, but now I was too embarrassed to admit what was going on even to him. Still, as the evening wore on, we sat in a small bar near my office. I nervously swirled my beer glass before deciding to start a conversation. What's wrong, Mike? David asked immediately, once we'd settled into a quiet corner. You haven't been yourself the last time we talked. Something wrong with Sarah? He hit the nail on the head right away. He knew me too well. You and she always seemed such a strong couple. It's hard to imagine. I squeezed my fingers on the cold glass of the goblet and quietly said, I think Sarah is cheating on me. David's eyes widened. What? What makes you think that? I smiled bitterly. It's a long story. And I began my story. I told him everything. How Sarah had been distant lately, how she was always late at work, how I had seen her with a colleague and our argument about it. I told him about the lie with my friend on Saturday and about the underwear I had found. He whistled when he heard about the lacy underwear. Yes, you can't get out of this by caring about your husband. If she bought something like this and is hiding it, it's clearly not for nothing. While I was speaking, David did not interrupt, but only grew more and more gloomy and nodded sympathetically. Damn, man, he breathed when I finished. This is looking really bad. Exactly. I took a sip of warm beer, which had gone flat, and winced. I feel paranoid, like a spy in my own home. But the facts. The facts don't speak in my favor. Have you talked to her about this? David asked cautiously. I tried. When I saw her with that guy, Kevin, I couldn't hold back. I made a scene. She denied everything, said she was just a colleague, and was very offended. Maybe it really is a colleague, David interjected. You said she hugged him goodbye. It could very well be a friendly hug. I hoped I was just winding myself up, too. But then there was the rest. I shook my head. No, there's something here. She's lying to me, Dave. Straight up, looking me in the eye. Yep, inventing a meeting with a friend is a big deal, he muttered. And most importantly, why? To spend time with who knows who. We were silent for a while. I tiredly rubbed my face with my palm. What should I do? I asked quietly. I feel like I'm going crazy. It seems clear, but until I catch her, she won't confess. David nodded. Most likely, yes. It's unlikely that she'll spill the beans herself if she's been hiding it so carefully. You need proof. Real proof. I know, I sighed. But how? Follow her? Hire a private detective? That's possible. He took a sip of beer. But maybe you should try it yourself first. If she thinks you don't know anything, there's a chance to catch her. I thought so too. I'll keep an eye on her work. I smiled wryly. For example, she'll probably be late again this week, or that conference. Conference. She said today that she might have to go to a work conference this weekend. She has never done this before. Usually these trips are planned in advance, and then suddenly. David narrowed his eyes. Very convenient for her, of course. If this is a fake conference, it's a great opportunity to spend time with whoever it is. I clenched my fists under the table at the very thought of it. I won't let her just leave, I said slowly. I have to have proof by then, otherwise, I don't even know. The friend nodded understandingly. Listen, Mike, maybe we shouldn't push the trip too hard yet. Try to find out something before that. Go to her work unannounced one day when she says she's going to be late, or follow her where she goes after the office. I thought about it. I'll do it. We discussed the details a little more. David offered his help. If necessary, I can go for a ride with you. We'll follow in 2 cars so as not to get caught. Thanks, buddy, I said, relieved that I wasn't alone in this anymore. I hope it doesn't come to that, but it doesn't hurt to have a backup. We paid and left the bar. It was already dark. David hugged me goodbye. Hang in there, and know that no matter what happens, you are not alone. These words almost moved me to tears. I blinked quickly, holding back my tears. Thank you. I'll call if anything happens. On the way home, I felt both relief and heaviness. Relief because I had spoken out and found support. Heaviness because I was about to catch my wife red-handed. The thought made me sick, but I couldn't put it off any longer. I had almost no doubt that I was being betrayed. All that was left was to see with my own eyes, with whom and how. On Wednesday afternoon, Sarah texted me, going to be late at the office today. Preparing a project for a conference. Don't wait until dinner. That was to be expected. After talking to David, I was alert and ready to act. I wrote back briefly, okay, good luck, trying to sound casual. In fact, I had already worked out a plan. I had asked to leave work a little early, citing personal matters, and by 6 o'clock, I was not far from Sarah's office. I sat in my car in the parking lot across the street and watched the entrance. My heart was pounding so hard my chest hurt. I didn't know exactly what I would see, but a cold wave of anticipation washed over me. Around 6:30, the agency employees began to leave the building. The working day was over. The crowd gradually thinned. The lights in the windows on the 3rd floor, where Sarah's department was located, were only on in places. I waited. Around 6:45, I spotted a familiar figure at the side exit. Sarah. She wasn't alone. There was a man walking beside her. Even in the dim light, I recognized him, tall, dark, imposing. Andrew, her boss. They paused at the porch, exchanging a few words. Then Andrew touched her back lightly, guiding her toward the parking lot. My jaw clenched. They walked together toward the lot, where only a few cars remained. I huddled in the driver's seat, trying to remain unnoticed. Luckily, my car was parked in the shade of a tree. A moment later, I saw Sarah and Andrew approach a dark blue sedan that was probably the boss's car. He opened the passenger door for her. She smiled at him, a warm, genuine smile I hadn't seen her give in a long time, and climbed in. Andrew slammed the door, walked around the car, and climbed behind the wheel. The car started moving. I let them drive out onto the road and, after waiting a few seconds, followed them, keeping my distance. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. Here it was. All my suspicions would either be confirmed now or I wanted to cherish the hope that maybe he was just giving her a ride home or to the conference, you never know. But my heart no longer believed in these excuses. 10 minutes later, I realized they weren't going home. The blue sedan headed not toward our neighborhood, but toward the city center. 15 minutes later, it turned into the Riverside Hotel, one of the best in town, with a view of the river. I knew the place, an expensive restaurant, a rooftop bar. Not the place for a late-night business meeting, more for a candlelit dinner. I parked on the next street. The hotel had paid parking with a valet, and I preferred not to risk being seen next to their car. I walked quickly to the entrance of the hotel restaurant. As I went inside and hid behind a column, I saw them. Sarah and Andrew were sitting at a table in the corner of the room, some distance from the other guests. It was cozy and dimly lit, with a candle on the table. There were already glasses of red wine in front of them. My heart sank at the sight. My wife at a romantic dinner with another man. I watched from the semi-darkness behind the column, trying not to attract attention. Fortunately, the place was secluded enough that I could see them without being noticed. They were talking. Sarah was smiling, her face animated in a way I hadn't seen in a long time at home with me. She was talking enthusiastically, gesturing. Andrew looked at her with obvious admiration, occasionally leaning closer to hear. At one point, he covered her hand with his, which was lying on the table. I felt a sting, like a knife thrust. It was too intimate, too obvious. My throat tightened. I wanted to jump out of hiding, run up to them, ruin their idyllic evening with screams, accusations. But what would that achieve? A public scandal, shame for the entire restaurant, and Sarah would most likely deny everything or get angry. No, I had to act calmly. I quietly pulled out my phone and took a few photos, zooming in. The pictures showed the two of them at the table, leaning toward each other, hands touching. Proof. My heart was pounding, my breathing was heavy. I stood there for almost an hour, watching them eat, laugh, and talk. Every minute was excruciating, but I couldn't tear myself away. Eventually, they stood up. Andrew gallantly helped Sarah into her jacket. As they left the restaurant, I lingered behind, hiding behind other customers. They stopped in the hotel lobby. Andrew said a few words, putting his hand on her waist. And then what I had been waiting for and dreading happened. Sarah rose up on her toes and kissed him lightly on the cheek. He smiled and turned his head to meet her lips with his own. They had clearly forgotten everything around them, if only for a few seconds. I felt a rage and pain welling up in my chest, but I stood frozen, paralyzed, watching from a few feet away. When their lips parted, Sarah looked down in embarrassment, and Andrew seemed to say something quietly to her. She nodded, and he touched the strand of hair at her temple with his fingers, a gesture full of tenderness. That was it. That was enough. I hurried outside before I was noticed. The night greeted me with a cool breeze. I walked around the corner of the building and caught my breath, feeling myself shaking. I literally felt sick. The scene of their kiss was before my eyes. A minute later, I saw the two of them leave the hotel and head for the parking lot. I ducked into the shadows. Andrew opened the car door for her, and she got in. He got behind the wheel, and the car drove off. I didn't follow any longer. I had what I came for, absolute confirmation of her betrayal. When their car was out of sight, I finally allowed myself to step out of the shadows. My legs were shaking. I leaned against the cold brick wall of the building and covered my face with my hands. Hot tears gushed from my eyes before I could hold them back. A fire raged in my chest, anger, jealousy, despair mixed into a lump that burned my soul. After about 10 minutes, I somehow calmed down enough to get into the car and drive home. I barely remembered the road. My head was splitting. Closer to home, I stopped on the side of the road and sat in the dark for a long time, trying to sort myself out. Two desires were rushing around inside me: to immediately dump the whole truth on her, throw her things on the street, yell at her, and at the same time not to give myself away, wait until the end of the week and catch her for good so that she would have nowhere to go. I remembered about the conference. They were probably planning to go there together. If I ruined everything today, she would simply wriggle out of the trip. She would say that she was not going anywhere, or maybe she would become more careful and continue to lie. No, I had to see this through to the end. Having made my decision, I started the car and drove home. When I entered, the house lights were already on. Sarah was upstairs. I heard the sound of water, probably taking a shower. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket, took a few deep breaths, and stood up. I was shaking from the anger that had surged up again, but I ordered myself to control myself for the sake of this last step. Sarah came out of the bathroom as if nothing had happened, wearing a t-shirt and shorts, her hair wrapped in a towel. "Hello," she said calmly. "Are you home yet?" As you can see, I turned away, hiding my eyes, and pretended to change clothes. She fell silent, probably sensing my cold tone. "I'll have a quick dinner and go straight to bed. I'm tired," she said after a couple of seconds. "Aha," was all I answered. Everything inside me was boiling, but I held on. I could feel her presence behind me in the middle of the bedroom. She was probably looking at me, trying to figure out my mood. But I didn't give her a chance. When I finished fiddling with my shirt, I muttered, "I'm going to bed too. Good night." And he walked past her, trying not to even meet her eyes. As I was getting ready for bed, I noticed out of the corner of my eye how she carefully lay down on the very edge of the bed, as if measuring the distance between us. Not a word more was said that night. I heard her crying quietly after a while, her face buried in the pillow. Perhaps it was remorse or fear. I didn't care anymore. I lay with my eyes open, looking at the darkness of the ceiling and waiting for the morning to come, when the final game would begin. On Friday morning, Sarah was frantically packing for an upcoming conference. She had only mentioned it the night before, saying she had a couple of seminars to attend and would be back on Sunday. I nodded then, pretending not to care. Now, as I watched her stuff her business suit and laptop into her bag, I could barely contain my anger. "Are you leaving early?" I asked, sipping coffee at the kitchen table. "I think about 2 o'clock," she answered, zipping up her bag. "I want to have time to register by the evening. It starts tomorrow morning, but it's better to arrive early." I just chuckled in response. I left for work before her, but my soul was restless. I warned David, today is the hour X. He, as promised, was ready to back me up. We agreed that he would go with me. Around 1:30, I asked for time off from work and rushed home under the pretext of urgent business. As expected, no one was home anymore. Sarah had left. I quickly changed into jeans and a jacket, grabbed the phone with the photos as evidence, and went out. David was waiting for me at the side of the road in his SUV. "Ready?" he asked gloomily. "Ready," I nodded. We set off toward the conference center, the address of which I had previously learned from Sarah's work papers. The conference was being held at a country spa about 100 miles from our city. The drive would take about 2 hours. I barely spoke on the way, clenching my fists and imagining what I would see. David tried a couple of times to distract me with unrelated conversations, but soon realized that it was useless and fell silent. As we approached the hotel, we saw a large parking lot filled with cars. Judging by the signs and plaques, the conference was large-scale. However, I doubted that Sarah really planned to actively participate. My heart told me that the most important thing for her was the opportunity to spend time with her lover. "There's her car," David suddenly noticed. I saw Sarah's silver sedan parked near the entrance. So they were already here. "Let's go, let's stand further away," I muttered. We parked the car at the far end of the lot and got out. As we walked, I felt my legs shaking. My head was pounding. Now or never. Maybe we should ask the front desk for a number, David suggested quietly as we walked into the lobby. They're unlikely to tell outsiders, I shook my head, but we'll find out anyway. Conference participants with badges were milling about in the lobby, some chatting, some registering at the counter. I looked around, looking for familiar silhouettes, and almost immediately I noticed Sarah. She was standing at the registration desk with Andrew. A blow to the heart. They had received some key cards and were now heading to the elevator, mingling with a group of other guests. I see them, I said through gritted teeth. Calm down, David put his hand on my shoulder, holding me back. Don't do anything stupid now. I nodded, although inside I was seething. We followed at a distance. Sarah and Andrew got into the elevator with a few people. We saw what floor they went to the third. We waited for the next elevator and went up. On the third floor, the corridor stretched in both directions. The guests were going to their rooms. In the distance, at the turn, I noticed Sarah and Andrew. They stopped at the door. Andrew opened the door with his key card and made an inviting gesture. Sarah smiled and entered first. He followed her. The door closed. I stood in the middle of the hallway, staring at the spot where my wife and her lover had just disappeared. For a moment, David and I were silent. Then my friend asked quietly, "Well, I'll do it myself from here," I said firmly. "Thank you for coming, Dave, but I need to go on my own from here." "Are you sure?" He looked worried. "Maybe we shouldn't barge in now? You have evidence. We can talk calmly later." Calmly? I smiled bitterly. "No, I've had enough. I have to finish this." David looked at me searchingly, then sighed. "Okay, I'll be downstairs if anything happens. Call me." I nodded gratefully. When he left in the elevator, I walked slowly down the hallway to my room. My heart was pounding in my ears. Stopping in front of the door, I hesitated for a second, then clenched my fist and slammed it hard against the door several times. Muffled voices were heard behind the door. A few seconds later, the door opened slightly on the chain, and Sarah's face appeared. She looked scared. "Michael," she breathed out, her eyes widening in horror. "Open up," I said. "What? What are you doing here?" She was clearly confused. "Open up," I said, I repeated, holding my voice in with difficulty, "or I'll break this door down." She disappeared, closing the door, probably to remove the chain. A moment later, the door swung open again. Sarah stood in the doorway, pale as a sheet. Behind her, I saw Andrew. He looked shocked, too. "Michael," Sarah began quietly, her voice shaking. "It's not what you think." Hearing this painfully banal phrase, I lost my temper. "Not what I think," I barked, rushing past her. "What do you think this is?" Andrew took a step forward, raising his palms. "Listen, Michael." "Shut up," I said, looking him straight in the eye. The man who had destroyed my family stood before me. Pain and rage blinded me. "Please, let's talk calmly." Andrew began, but I didn't let him finish. All my self-control, which had been building up over the last few weeks, snapped. I was struck. Andrew recoiled. Sarah screamed. "Mike, don't. Don't you dare say my name," I spat, turning to her. "How could you? How could both of you?" Andrew, holding his face, tried to recover. "I think I'll go." "Damn it, you will," I said through my teeth. "Get out before I kill you." He looked at Sarah. She stood there, silent, her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Without another word, Andrew hobbled past me and slipped out into the hallway, closing the door behind him. There was silence, broken only by Sarah's ragged breathing and my own heartbeat. I glanced around the room. Her jacket was strewn across the bed, Andrew's tie lay next to it. There were 2 cups of coffee on the nightstand. The intimate scene had a sobering effect on me. The anger had exploded like a blow to Andrew, and now it was replaced by icy clarity. "Where should I start?" I said quietly, looking at my wife, who was leaning against the wall. "Maybe how long has this been going on?" Sarah sobbed. wiping away her tears with a shaking hand. Michael, I'm sorry. I Answer me. I raised my voice without moving from my place. How long have you been dating him? She covered her face with her hands. A few months. I shuddered. I expected it, but hearing the confession was painful. How much exactly? I insisted. Since spring, she whispered through her fingers. Almost half a year. I closed my eyes, trying to control myself. Half a year of lies. I'm sorry. I smiled bitterly. I'm sorry. Do you realize what you've done? She started to approach me. Mike, please let me explain. Explain? What is there to explain? You cheated on me. For a long time, cynically, behind my back. And you also tried to make a fool out of me with your lies. My voice broke, and I fell silent, trying to catch my breath. Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably. I know everything. It's disgusting, unforgivable. She said through tears. I cannot be forgiven, but... But what? I barked. Were you missing something? What, Sarah? I tried for you. I loved you. I loved you too, she cried back, and then immediately pressed her hands to her lips, bursting into tears again. Loved? I shook my head. Excellent love. Please. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Let's talk. Normally. Normally. My anger flared up again. How about having a normal conversation before going to bed with another man? Have you thought about that? She didn't answer. She just shook her head helplessly. Why, Sarah? I asked more quietly, exhausted by my own rage. What wasn't enough for you? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to stop herself from sobbing. I don't know. She finally managed to squeeze out. I'm not making excuses, really. It's my fault. I made a terrible mistake. A mistake? I echoed. It wasn't just one time or one night. 6 months of it was a choice, Sarah, not a mistake. She only burst into tears even more, unable to answer. In the ensuing pause, I realized that I had no more strength to scream. Devastation set in. I'm sorry, she whispered again, dropping her hands. If only I could turn back time. But you can't, I replied harshly. It's over, Sarah. She froze. What? No, don't say that. We can. We could try. Try what? I asked wearily. Forget how you lied to me. Pretend like nothing happened. I'll never forget this. I'll never forgive you. At these words, a groan escaped her chest. She took a step towards me. Please, don't go. It hurt me to look at her. The same woman I had loved for 12 years, I now barely recognized. You knew that you would ruin everything by doing this, I said more calmly, almost mournfully, and you still went for it. She just shook her head, sobbing. I was a fool. I thought I could stop. I raised my hands in a gesture of helplessness. Enough. Just enough. I turned towards the door. In a few seconds of this conversation, I finally understood. This cannot go on. Sarah rushed towards me and grabbed my hand. Michael, please, don't leave me. I stopped and looked at her pale, suffering, distorted face. Somewhere deep inside, pity stirred and a memory of how much we had. But it was immediately eclipsed by the image of her kissing another. I slowly freed my hand. You already left me, I said quietly. And without turning around again, he left the room, closing the door behind him. I went down to the hotel lobby, barely able to figure out what to do next. My head was buzzing, like after an explosion. My body was starting to ache from fatigue and the stress I had endured. In the distance, I saw David quickly heading toward me. He must have heard the noise or was just waiting nearby. Mike, he called out quietly. I looked up at him. I must have looked terrifying. Red eyes, compressed lips, white knuckles. My friend carefully took me by the elbow. Let's get out of here. I nodded silently. We went out to the parking lot, got into the car. David started the engine and drove away from this damned place. There was silence in the cabin for about 10 minutes. I stared out the window, but I couldn't see anything. My eyes were blurred with tears, and I tried my best not to burst into tears again. It was hard to breathe, as if a stone had been placed on my chest. "Do you want to talk?" David asked quietly after a while, casting a cautious glance at me. "No," I squeezed out. My voice was hoarse, my throat sore from screaming. He nodded understandingly and asked no more questions. The rest of the way home was spent in silence. Empty rooms were waiting for me at home. It was getting dark, and it was starting to rain outside. David insisted on coming in with me. "You shouldn't be alone now," he said firmly. I didn't resist. It was as if something had died inside me. Everything was indifferent. We went into the living room, and I sat down on the sofa. David went into the kitchen, came back with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses he had apparently rummaged through our bar cabinet as if he were at home. Here, he splashed me a good portion of amber liquid. I obediently took the glass, but did not drink. I only squeezed the cold glass with my fingers. David sat down next to me, looking at me with concern. I never asked, "Did you hit him?" He made a gesture with his hand, apparently imitating a blow. "I hit him," I answered evenly. "Strongly, enough to feel it. It's a pity I didn't see it," the friend exhaled, "but I think he deserved it." We fell silent. My consciousness seemed to switch off. I could neither think nor speak. I just sat and stared into space. Finally, David said quietly, "You need to decide something. What will you do next?" His question echoed in my empty soul. Next? What could next be? "I don't know," I said honestly, rubbing my face with my palm. The stubble on my chin pricked my fingers. I didn't even remember when I shaved. "Maybe you should sleep first, and in the morning." He began. I shook my head. "No, I won't be able to sleep anyway." I really didn't feel any sleepiness, just exhaustion and pain. Then, "Should I call someone in my family, my parents?" David asked carefully. I imagined my mother's face if she heard what had happened. My heart sank painfully. "No, not now." "Not yet," I answered quietly. "Okay, then maybe a cold shower." "Dave, I appreciate the concern," I smiled wryly, "but nothing will fix this now." He sighed. "Sorry, I just want to help." "You've already helped by being there," I said, finally taking a sip of whiskey. The bitter, strong drink burned my throat, but that was even a good thing. The physical pain distracted me from the mental one for a second. We sat for a while longer. It seemed like half a lifetime had passed, but in reality the hands of the clock on the wall showed around 10 in the evening. Just a couple of hours ago, my life had completely collapsed. The phone I had thrown on the couch had vibrated several times already. I knew who was trying to call or text. Sarah, of course. I hadn't looked at the screen once. I didn't want to see her name, much less read the apologies or excuses she was probably sending. Finally, David stood up. "Listen, stay with me today, or I'll stay with you. It doesn't matter, but it'll be worse for you alone now." I nodded without objection. "You're probably right. Thank you." "Pack some things then." I started to head for the bedroom, but stopped halfway. Everything inside me clenched at the thought of entering our bedroom, the very one where we had slept together not long ago, and now, it seemed like the very air there was saturated with pain. "I don't want to go there," I said dully, looking at David. He understood everything without words. "Then come to me as you are. I'll give you my clothes. I don't care." I shook his hand gratefully. "Thank you." Before leaving, I went upstairs to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror, a man who had aged 10 years looked at me with an empty gaze. I didn't even recognize myself at first, and suddenly my gaze fell on the gold wedding ring on my finger. I slowly clenched my hand into a fist, a symbol of 12 years of marriage, a symbol of our union, which she had destroyed. I carefully removed the ring from my finger. The metal seemed to burn my skin. There was a barely noticeable mark on my ring finger where the ring had been worn for so many years. I placed the ring on the shelf near the sink. That was it. I couldn't wear it for another second. I went downstairs, grabbed my phone and jacket, and David and I walked out into the drizzling rain and headed to his car. I sat in silence the entire way to Dave's house. I think he called his wife to warn her about the visitor. but I didn't even pay attention. I was shaking, either from nervous exhaustion or from the chills. I turned on the heating in the car and wrapped myself in a jacket. At some point, my friend carefully remarked, "You know, you'll almost certainly have to. Well, get a divorce." The word divorce hung in the air like something unreal, although I had already told Sarah that it was all over to officially end our marriage. The thought made me bitter. "I know," I answered quietly, "but not today. I'm not ready." "Of course," David quickly agreed. "That's not what we're talking about today. Just know that I'll help you in any way I can, with a lawyer and morally." "Thank you," I said wearily. I was lucky to have such a friend. We soon arrived at David's. His wife, Amy, greeted us with concern. Dave had apparently told her the gist of the matter. She expressed her compassion quietly, without asking any questions, for which I was grateful. They installed me in the guest room, although I hardly slept that night. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly and irrevocably lives crumble. Yesterday morning, I was the husband who believed that things could still be fixed. And today I no longer knew who I was or where I was going. But I knew one thing: there was no going back to my old life. In the early morning silence, I briefly remembered how a year ago there was also a drizzle of spring rain outside the window, and I had no idea what trials I would soon have to endure. In the morning, after a restless night at David's, I returned to my home. A friend offered to go with me, but I refused. I had to manage on my own. I arrived at home around 10 in the morning. My soul was scratching at cats. I had no idea what I would see and how I would behave. I had barely opened the front door when I heard quick footsteps coming from the living room. Sarah appeared on the threshold. She looked depressed. Her eyes were red, with dark circles under them. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. It seemed she hadn't slept all night, just like me. We just looked at each other for a few seconds, silently. My heart sank from pity, from anger, from everything at once. But I pulled myself together. "We need to talk," I said hoarsely, walking inside. "Yes," she responded quietly. I walked into the kitchen and put the kettle on automatically, a habit that had become automatic. Sarah sat down at the table, her hands shaking in front of her. I leaned against the countertop, unsure where to begin. She began and fell silent, taking a deep breath. "I understand that after yesterday there are no words that could." I raised my hand, stopping the flow of her remorse. "Just answer one question, Sarah. Why? Why didn't you come to me and tell me you weren't happy? Why? Why the betrayal?" Sarah looked down. She was silent for several long seconds, then said barely audibly, "I was afraid of ruining everything. It sounds stupid now. I wasn't looking for this, Mike. It was just innocent talk at first. I was flattered by Andrew's attention. I felt wanted, needed. And then it went too far. I don't know what came over me." She sobbed as she continued. "I thought I could control the situation, that it was just a momentary thing. I believed that I would leave, that you wouldn't find out, and everything would remain as it was. So that you can continue to live a lie?" I asked bitterly. She closed her eyes and tears rolled down her cheeks. "No, I don't know. I guess I was deceiving myself too." "Were you happy with the way it is?" I asked coldly. "A wonderful husband at home and a lover on the side?" "No," she suddenly jumped up in despair. "It didn't suit me. Every day I hated myself for it. I was ashamed, hurt. I wanted to tell you everything 1,000 times, but she didn't tell," I quietly summed up. Sarah lowered her head. Yes. There was silence, broken only by the noise of the kettle boiling. I was shaking, but I tried to maintain an outward appearance of calm. "Michael," she said quietly, "I know there's no forgiveness for what I did, but I want you to know what happened between me and him. It's over. I told Andrew yesterday that I didn't want to go on. I broke up with him." I chuckled. "That's very noble of you, considering I caught you." She grimaced at my words, but continued to beg. "I'm ready to do anything so that you could forgive me someday. I love you, Mike. Even though it's hard for you to believe it now, it's true. What happened to him was an illusion, a mistake. She cried, and the scene turned my insides upside down. Once, her tears had been the worst of all evils for me, and I had done everything to make her smile. Now, I felt nothing but immense fatigue. Sarah, I sat down opposite her, clasping my hands to hide their trembling. Listen to me carefully. I'm not yelling anymore. I'm just saying, our marriage is over. She shook her head as if trying not to hear. No, no, don't say that. It's true, I said firmly. I'm filing for divorce. The words hung between us, heavy, inevitable. Sarah burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Please, give me a chance. I will change everything. I will spend years earning your trust again. Just don't give up on me, she said through her sobs. I felt my heart breaking with pain, but I knew there was no turning back. I have no more trust, I said quietly. You destroyed it, and I don't recognize myself anymore next to you. I can't live always imagining you. She sobbed louder. I'll do whatever you say. I'll go to a psychologist, to a priest, any condition. She spoke incoherently, clutching at straws. Enough, I stood up, unable to hear it any longer. Don't humiliate yourself, and don't torture me. Sarah stood up too, trying to catch my eye. So, that's it? Are you sure you've decided? I nodded. Decided. She staggered as if struck. We stood silent for a few moments. Then I said, I think it would be better for you to live somewhere else for now. Do you have somewhere to go? Sarah wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. Probably. I can go to a friend's, or to my sister's. Okay? I can leave myself if you want to stay, I said wearily. But I think we should go our separate ways. No, she shook her head. You stay. This is your home. I'll pack my things. When? I asked. Today. Now. She looked around helplessly. I can't be here after everything. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't say anything. I just watched her walk out of the kitchen and slowly upstairs to the bedroom to pack. There was an emptiness in my chest. I guess that's what it feels like after a major operation when something important has been removed and you don't even realize the extent of the loss yet, you're just stunned. As I was sorting through the remains of our things before the shows, I found a small velvet box in the drawer of my bedside table. My heart skipped a beat. When I opened it, I saw Sarah's wedding ring. She must have left it behind without telling me. I stared at the gold circle lying on the white cushion of the case for a long time. It was her silent farewell. With a heavy heart, I slammed the box shut and put it away. Someday, I decided, I would melt both our rings down into something new or sell them as a symbol of the past. For now, I didn't have the strength for that gesture. A couple of hours later, Sarah came down with a small suitcase. I sat in the living room the whole time, staring at one spot. I didn't offer to help, and I didn't stop her. It would have been too ridiculous to offer to help her now. She stopped at the door, sobbing. I'll go, if there are documents to sign, or you know where to find me. I nodded, avoiding looking at her. My heart was breaking at the sight of her broken face, but I pushed away pity. The most terrible thoughts were about suddenly forgiving everything out of pity or pain. No, I can't do that. Sarah shifted her weight, as if hoping I would say something at the end. But I remained silent, clenching my teeth. Then she said in a trembling voice, Forgive me, for everything. Silence was her answer. She lowered her head and, quietly sobbing, left the house. The door closed. I was left alone in the deafening silence of our now my home. I didn't know how long I sat there motionless. Ghosts of the past hovered around me. Every corner reminded me of her. Here on this couch we watched movies, huddled together. Over there at the counter, she laughed at my attempt to make my own sushi. Her spring jacket was still hanging on a hook in the hallway. She must have forgotten it in her rush. A lump came to my throat, and I closed my eyes. It seemed that just a little more, and I would break down. But I had no right. Everything had already been decided. I slowly got up and went to the window. A cold autumn rain was pouring in the yard. A silhouette flashed past the glass. Sarah walked quickly to her car, put down her suitcase, and sat behind the wheel. A moment, and the silver sedan drove away, disappearing in the gray shroud of rain. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass. I felt like an empty space. There was no scream, no tears left, only a plane scorched by pain inside. But at the same time, there was a strange feeling, like relief that the worst was already behind me. There would be no more lies. Now ahead was only the need to rebuild my life from the rubble. The next few days were like a lingering, gray daydream. I took time off from work under the pretext of family circumstances. I was unable to immediately return to my usual life, pretending that everything was normal. I spent most of my time at home alone, trying to comprehend the new reality. After a week and a half, I finally returned to work. My colleagues, of course, noticed the changes in me. I had lost a lot of weight, and at first I hardly spoke to anyone. When they asked if everything was okay, I answered with general phrases about personal difficulties. Most of them tactfully kept their mouths shut, but a couple of people shared stories of their divorces and offered to help with advice. It turns out that this had happened to many. I just hadn't paid attention before. The realization that I was not alone in such grief was both comforting and saddening. But immersing myself in work helped me to distract myself, albeit briefly. On the very first Monday after our breakup, I got busy with the inevitable. In the morning, gathering all my willpower, I called our family lawyer, whom some friends had once recommended to me. In a trembling voice, I explained the situation and made an appointment for a consultation. The very idea of filing for divorce seemed wild, but I understood that there was no point in delaying. After calling the lawyer, I sat for a long time, staring at the phone screen. I needed to tell my parents. I didn't want to talk to them, but I couldn't put it off. My mother knew Sarah like a daughter. They were close. With shaking fingers, I dialed her number. "Hey, Mikey," Mom responded happily. "How are you? How's Sarah?" These simple questions pierced me with pain. I exhaled with a strangled breath. "Mom, we need to talk." In short, terse words, I told her the terrible news. There was silence on the other end of the line. "Oh my God," was all she said after a pause, her voice trailing off. "Michael, son, I'm so sorry." I heard her voice tremble, and I could hardly hold on myself. "I'm fine," I lied. "We just decided to get a divorce." "How is this possible? You seem so happy." Mom burst into tears. "It happens," I barely managed to say, trying not to listen to my own heart screaming that happiness was an illusion. "Sorry about it on the phone. I didn't want to upset you, but I had to tell you." "You're not alone, do you hear?" she said through tears. "Daddy and I are here. We'll help you as much as we can." "I know, Mom. Thank you," I whispered. "Sarah, Mom wanted to ask, but didn't dare." "She left," I answered dryly. "We don't communicate." Mom just sighed heavily. We ended the conversation, promising to contact each other again later. I put the phone down and felt a strange relief. Another terrible step had been taken. On Tuesday, I had a meeting with a lawyer. I walked into the small, bright office as if in a fog. The lawyer, Mr. Harper, was sympathetic, which for some reason almost made me cry, probably because he looked at me as if I were a real victim. I was a victim. I just didn't want to admit it. We discussed the details of the divorce process. We had no children. The property was divided more or less clearly. The house was bought in equal shares. It had to be either sold and the money divided, or I had to buy out her share. At that moment, all this seemed trivial. I answered the lawyer's questions almost automatically and signed the necessary papers. "It will take you some time to gather all the documents," Mr. Harper said softly, "and your wife will need to read them and sign them too. Are you prepared to contact her about this?" I nodded. "Yes, I'll tell her in a while. I just don't feel like it yet." "I understand," he nodded, writing something down. "By law in our state, after you file the papers, it will take another 3 months before the court will approve the divorce, so you'll have time to think it over completely." "I've already thought it all through," I answered quietly. The lawyer looked at me with understanding. Sometimes after the first emotions, people change their minds. But apparently, this is not your case. I remained silent. The decision was firm, he was right about that. As I left the office, I felt even more empty, as if I had not only emotionally but legally buried my 12 years of marriage. But delay would only prolong the agony. Coming back to an empty house was hard, but I slowly began to tidy it up. Sarah had left a lot of things behind when she left. For several days, I didn't touch anything. I couldn't bring myself to do so. But one evening, I gathered my courage and began to sort through our shared past. I packed her clothes from the closet, her cosmetics, the little things that filled the house with her presence. Each object, each photo burned my hands with memories. Here was Sarah's favorite mug with a funny inscription. I bought it for our anniversary. Here was the woolen blanket under which she liked to read on cool evenings. And here was the wedding album. I froze, holding the heavy leather cover in my hands. On the cover, Sarah and I, young, happy, laughing, looking at each other, blinded by love and hope. A lump rose in my throat. I shoved the album to the very bottom of the box and covered it with clothes, unable to look further. By nightfall, the house had become strange and empty. Her things were gone, her photographs hidden. It was as if her very presence had been erased. I knew that many more reminders would surface, friends we had shared, favorite places, habits. But now, at least, I could try to move on without the constant material ghosts of the past. In the solitude of the evenings, I couldn't help but think a lot. Where did all the good things we had gone? Was it all really a lie? No, probably not. We really did have happy years. But people change, and we miss the moment when we became strangers. I tormented myself with questions about whether I could have prevented all this. Maybe if I had paid more attention to her, I would have noticed the signs earlier. Each such thought was like salt on a wound. My therapist, whom I eventually decided to see, told me something simple at the first session. You are not to blame for the choice that the other person made. Rationally, I understood this, but my heart had not yet caught up with my mind. There were moments when I would habitually want to share some little thing with Sarah, an interesting article or a funny incident, but the realization that she was no longer with me would hit me with renewed force. Habits ingrained by years of family life did not go away immediately. Sometimes I would still mechanically wait for her steps in the evening or catch myself thinking, I need to ask Sarah, and then I would remember, and the knife of disappointment would twist in my chest again. Nevertheless, day by day, in tiny steps, I learned to live alone. About a week passed, and I began to regain some zest for life. David and other friends kept me going. They dragged me out to dinner, to exercise. I resisted at first, but one day I realized that I hadn't thought about what had happened for a whole day, and that was real progress for me. Over dinner with friends, I was even able to genuinely smile at a joke for the first time in a long time, an unusual but sobering sensation. Of course, there were still difficult stages ahead, the official filing of papers, the formalization of the sale of the house. I had to see Sarah more than once to finally finalize everything. But I could now look at it without a sharp attack of pain, but with cold determination. Our story together had come to an end. Now it was time to write a new chapter of my life without her. I still did not know what awaited me ahead, but I was sure of one thing: I could handle it. I simply had no other choice. I had to live on. A month after our breakup, life began to settle into some sort of routine. The pain was no longer an electric shock every morning, but rather a background aching sadness. I went to work with discipline, and in the evenings I tried to occupy myself with something, from watching old movies to going for long runs. The house was still quiet, but it no longer drove me crazy, becoming simply the background of my new lonely life. One of the unresolved issues was our house. On the advice of a lawyer, I decided to put it up for sale. I did not want to remain there alone, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, and it was easier to divide the property with the money from the sale. Sarah, through her lawyer, gave consent to the sale. We did not communicate directly. Communication took place through official channels. It was strange and bitter. The person who was closest to me was now reduced to dry letters through representatives. I invited a realtor, and soon our once cozy house became an object of showing to potential buyers. I removed all my personal belongings, cleaned the interior to neutral. Curiously, from the outside the house looked perfect, spacious, bright, with a well-kept garden, as if the dramas that had played out in it had not happened. Strangers walked around the rooms, looked into closets, had polite conversations, and inside I had the feeling as if they were examining a museum long abandoned by the owners. One evening, after yet another showing, I lingered in the empty rooms. I had cleaned up to make the house tidy, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to stop and look around, to listen to the silence of the empty rooms. There was our living room, the walls still remembering our laughter. The kitchen, where we had cooked dinner together so many evenings. I remember how she and I once, having left the soup half-cooked on the stove, suddenly began to dance in the middle of the kitchen to a song on the radio, laughing, splashing ourselves with sauce that had spilled out of the pan, and we didn't care about the mess, we were happy. On the door frame, there were small marks, the measurements of the nephew's heights, whom we had once invited to stay with us for the holidays. We marked their heights there, thinking that one day we would mark the heights of our own children. The house was breathing with memories, and that evening I was finally able not to brush them off, but to calmly experience them. I walked through the rooms, mentally saying goodbye. Goodbye, I said quietly, closing the door of the bedroom where we were once so happy and so unhappy. There were no tears, only a light sadness. I went out onto the back porch and looked at the garden where we had once planted a young apple tree together. Now the tree had grown and was green, not knowing that its owners were leaving this house. A buyer was found quite quickly. A young family, full of enthusiasm for making a new life here. The couple was about to have a baby, and they admired the garden and the living room, where they planned to gather the big family for the holidays. Listening to their dreams, I remembered how Sarah and I had once dreamed of children, of noisy Christmases in this house. But it didn't work out. Well, maybe the new house will have a new happy story. When we signed the sales papers at the agency, I felt some strange relief, as if a heavy burden had finally settled on the ground. Sarah was not present in person. She signed the documents through a representative in advance. Perhaps it's for the best. A couple of weeks later, I moved out for good. I transferred most of the money I got from the house to an account that was opened in Sarah's name as part of our agreement. I kept enough for myself to start over somewhere else. I decided to rent a small apartment downtown for a while. I didn't want to rush into new purchases right away. I liked the sense of temporariness around me, no ties, no anchors. On moving day, I loaded the last boxes into the car and paused in the driveway. The house stood empty, the dark windows staring at me as if they were strangers. "Everything will be fine," David, who had been helping me move my things, said quietly as he approached. He patted me on the shoulder. "Yes," I nodded with a slight smile. "I know." We closed the last truck filled with my belongings. The yard was empty. David looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, you're doing great. Much better than I feared." "I'm just tired of suffering," I sighed. "And I've probably gotten used to it." "It's obvious. Just a little bit more, and you'll be as good as new." I smiled weakly. "I'm far from being a newbie, but at least I feel the ground under my feet again." My friend nodded and squeezed my shoulder tightly. "I'm proud of you, Mike." We got into our cars and drove out the gates, which automatically closed behind us. And so ended another chapter of my life. My new apartment was small but cozy. At first, the silence was even more oppressive. It was strange not to hear the familiar sounds of a big house. But gradually I settled in. I put away my books, bought a new sofa, got a coffee maker, and tried to find new routines. It was a strange feeling, like returning to bachelor life, only as a completely different person. For the first time in many years, I felt truly independent, owed nothing to anyone, and dependent on no one. It was both lonely and strangely liberating. Sometimes in the evenings I wondered where Sarah was now. She had gone to live with her older sister in another city, as far as I knew from mutual friends. She had also quit her job, apparently not wanting to stay at the agency after the scandal. I hadn't heard about Andrew and didn't want to hear about him. I was surprised that I felt neither anger nor jealousy, only a slight sadness at how strangers we had become. I honestly didn't care whether they were together or not. I consciously shut myself off from any news about her, trying to look only forward. Finally, the time came for our official divorce. The court hearing was scheduled for a few days later. In fact, it was a formality both agreements reached. But this formality was supposed to be the final point. It seemed to me that I had already lived through everything I could, but my heart still sank at the thought of that day. Nevertheless, I was ready to put the final point. In rare moments, I could even look at our story from the outside and analyze it soberly. I now understood how fragile our relationship was, even though I considered it unshakable. I did not notice or did not want to notice the warning signs when it was still possible to fix something between us. I was partly responsible for this, but I also understood that the final choice is always up to the person. Sarah could have come to me honestly, asked for help, for a break, for anything, but instead she chose the path of deception. I could not change this. And therefore, no matter how hard it was, I had to let go of the past and no longer blame either her or myself. Just learn the lessons and move on. The day of the official divorce arrived. I arrived at the courthouse half an hour before the appointed time, nervously glancing at my watch. Despite all my determination, something inside me was still clenching. This was the last step. The family court hallway was bustling with other couples, lawyers, and visitors. I sat down on a bench outside the courtroom and waited for Mr. Harper, my lawyer. Then I noticed Sarah. She was standing by the window at the end of the hall, next to her lawyer. My heart sank in surprise. I hadn't seen her for months. She had lost a lot of weight, and she looked pale and tired, as if she had aged several years in the past year. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she was wearing a simple black suit. I felt uneasy. I had been expecting this meeting, but I still didn't know where to look. We made eye contact. Sarah nodded quietly in greeting. I nodded back and looked down. There was no point in approaching or saying anything. Whatever was needed would be heard in the room. Finally, the secretary loudly announced our names and case number, inviting us inside. The small room with its tall windows seemed unbearably bright. We sat at a long table, each with our own lawyer. The judge, an elderly woman with a tired, kind face, quickly looked over our papers and loudly, but matter-of-factly announced the beginning of the hearing. The procedure was short and surprisingly prosaic. The judge asked a few standard questions about the voluntariness of the decision, about the absence of claims. Sarah and I answered in monosyllables, avoiding looking at each other. My heart was beating loudly and dully. For a moment I wanted to extend my hand to her, to say something comforting, but I held back. It was not my right now. When the judge asked me if I agreed to the annulment, for a moment my mind flashed back to our distant wedding day. The same question the priest had asked me 12 years earlier. Do I agree to take this woman as my wife? I said firmly, yes. Now I said an equally firm, yes, I agree, only this time the yes was an end, not a beginning. The words, marriage dissolved, echoed loudly in me. I met Sarah's gaze for a moment. She was crying quietly, turning away. I myself was barely holding on, my palms clenched under the table until they hurt. 15 minutes later, the judge declared our marriage officially dissolved. Chapter 7, paragraph such and such. The words floated past my consciousness. I felt something inside me break completely. That's it. The end. I wish you both good luck, the judge added unexpectedly softly in conclusion. Things happen, but life goes on. These simple words touched me. A lump formed in my throat, and I only nodded in response. We thanked her. Someone, probably me, collected the signed documents. I don't remember how I got up from the table and went out into the corridor. My memory returned only when I left the hall. Sarah stood alone near the door, clutching a folder of papers to her chest. Her lawyer had gone off to talk on the phone. I stopped, not knowing whether to walk past or... She looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness and weariness. I suddenly wanted to say something to her, maybe just a simple good luck or take care. She was the first to break the silence. "Thank you for not dragging this out," Sarah said quietly. I nodded. "It will be better for both of us." We were silent for a while. Then she smiled wearily at the corners of her lips. "I hope you'll be happy, Mike." I felt a lump in my throat. For too many years I had heard her say my name with love, joy, anger. Now it sounded like a polite farewell. "You too," I answered sincerely. There was nothing more to say. We stood a few steps apart, like strangers, and it was true. From now on we were strangers. Sarah was the first to retreat. "Well, goodbye." "Goodbye," I repeated almost in a whisper. She turned and walked quickly down the corridor towards the exit. I watched her for a few seconds, then took a deep breath and walked out of the courthouse as a free man. Outside, the city seemed different, or maybe I was looking at it with different eyes. The city street before me was a landscape of possibilities. The winter sun was shining brightly, the frosty air burned my lungs. The city was bustling around me, and I stopped on the porch, threw my head back, and looked up at the blinding blue sky. Suddenly, I felt relief. Finally, it was over. No hanging questions, no legal strings, freedom. Without realizing it, I rubbed my thumb over the ring finger of my left hand. There was no longer a ring on it, but the habit remained. This gesture suddenly confirmed, that's it. I slowly walked down the steps, and with each step my chest filled with either joy or sadness, or rather, a strange mixture of both. I did everything I could. I fought for our love to the end, and now I let go. At that moment, I remembered the judge's words, "Life goes on." I looked around the city street, full of hurrying people. Somewhere in the distance, life was noisy, new meetings, new trials, and joys awaited. The city seemed brighter, the sky higher. My life also went on without Sarah, but she was there, and this meant that there could still be a lot of good things ahead. As I walked to the car, I felt both sad and light in my soul. Behind me were both the happiness and the pain of 12 years of my life. Ahead lay the unknown. But now I was not afraid of it. I took out my phone and dialed David's number. "Well," came the excited voice of a friend. "That's it," I replied, and couldn't help but smile slightly. "I'm free." "Congratulations, my friend." David breathed a sigh of relief. "It was worth celebrating. Let's drink to a new life tonight." "Yes, perhaps," I agreed, feeling as if the last weight had fallen from my shoulders. The friend suddenly laughed. "You know, now all the ladies of the city are at your service. It's time to conquer new heights," I snorted. "Hey, take it easy. I need to sort myself out first." Okay, David chuckled. "But keep in mind, when you're ready, I have a couple of candidates." "Agreed," I laughed briefly for the first time in a long time. There was no bitterness in this laugh, only the anticipation of a joke and something new. As I walked to the car, 1,000 thoughts popped into my head. What next? Maybe take a vacation and change my surroundings for the first time in a long time. Go, say, to the ocean, which I had dreamed about but kept putting off. Now nothing stood in the way. I was free to make decisions and wanted to take advantage of this new feeling of complete responsibility only for myself. This evening, David and I had agreed to meet up and celebrate my new life. He said he would invite a few more friends so I wouldn't drink alone. I didn't mind, but for now I was just standing in the bright winter sun, breathing in the frosty air and suddenly realizing I, too, wanted to go on living. I descended into the crowd and stepped forward towards my new life. A month after the official divorce, I decided to fulfill my long-time desire to see the ocean. A year ago, Sarah and I had planned to go to the coast, but somehow it never worked out. Now, nothing was stopping me from just up and going. I packed a suitcase, booked a place to stay, and bought a plane ticket to California. Through the window, I watched as the endless expanses of the country gave way to mountains and plains, and I thought that my life, too, was now flying into the unknown, but I was no longer afraid. On the first day of my trip, I stood on an endless sandy beach and watched the waves of the Pacific Ocean roll in. The salty wind ruffled my hair, the sun warmed my face. Walking along the embankment of the small resort town where I was staying, I admired the palm trees swaying in the breeze, listened to the cries of seagulls and the sound of the surf. The sea air was saturated with salt and freedom. I felt surprisingly calm. For the first time in many months, I was not tormented by heavy thoughts. Maybe the reason was the thousands of kilometers separating me from home and from the past, or maybe it was because time had done its job. I walked along the water's edge, letting the cold, foamy waves wash over my feet. In the distance, the silhouettes of surfers were dimly visible. Life was bubbling around, children running screaming from the oncoming waves, an elderly couple walking hand in hand, young guys playing beach volleyball. I was alone in all this, but the loneliness did not oppress me. On the contrary, I was comfortable watching people from the sidelines, feeling like I was part of a larger world. During the trip, I allowed myself small joys that I hadn't had the courage to do before. I tried surfing, ate exotic seafood in coastal cafes, and struck up conversations with strangers. It turned out that the world was full of friendliness. An old fisherman on the pier told me the story of his life, and a young couple shared tips on places to visit. I felt like a part of something bigger and understood that my loneliness was relative. There are always people around, you just have to open your heart to meet them. On the third day of the trip, sitting on the coastal rocks to the sound of the surf, I took out the notebook I had brought with me and began to write down my thoughts. I had never done this before. I had never kept a journal. But now the words flowed of their own accord. I wrote about what I had been through, about the pain, and about the forgiveness that I was gradually beginning to find within myself. Forgiveness not only for Sarah, but for myself for not saving our marriage. Confessions that I had not dared to say out loud appeared on the pages. I wrote that I forgive her. I wrote that I forgive myself, that I am letting go of our pain. With each sentence, I felt better. It was as if an ocean breeze blew away the last of the bitterness from my soul, leaving room for something new. I wrote down that I was grateful to fate for the lessons bitter, but valuable. That I still had a lot of inexperienced things ahead of me, and I wanted to be ready to meet new feelings without fear of possible pain. After all, now I knew that I could survive it if necessary. As the sun was setting, I folded my notebook and stood up. My soul was calm and light. Looking back at the endless ocean, I felt deeply humbled and at the same time ready to move on. The past had finally let me go there, on the Californian coast. That evening, I called my mother for the first time in a long time. Our conversation was easy. I told her about the ocean, about the town where I was staying, and I caught myself talking about it with enthusiasm. My mother was happy to hear the same liveliness in my voice. "You sound happy, Michael," she remarked in a pleased voice. I smiled as I watched the sunset flash on the water. Mom couldn't resist asking, "Have you found anyone for yourself on the beach?" I laughed. "No, Mom. For now, I'm enjoying my own company." "That's good too," she said wisely. "When you find yourself, someone will find you again." I smiled. Sounds like the truth. When I got home, I felt like I had truly left the heaviness behind. Sure, there was still loneliness and uncertainty ahead, but they no longer scared me. I began to value silence and self-sufficiency more. I learned to enjoy the moments again: a cup of morning coffee, a good book, a run in the park. These were simple joys, but they were the ones that gradually drove the sadness out of my soul. After some time, David, noticing my changes for the better, said with a sly smile, "Looks like you're our Mike again. Time to think about a new chapter." I smiled knowingly. "If you're talking about dating, I'm not sure I'm ready yet." "Come on, you're a different person now. No one is telling you to jump right into the deep end, but you shouldn't hide from the world either." I thought about his words. Indeed, the turning point was behind me. I felt that I was gradually becoming stronger and wiser. Why not try to open the door to something new? In the end, I allowed myself to be persuaded to at least go to one casual evening with a new acquaintance. Amy, David's wife, as it turned out, had long wanted to introduce me to her colleague, a pleasant, in her words, woman of my age, who had also recently gone through a divorce. Amy described her friend, Katerina, as a smart and kind woman, keen on reading and traveling. According to Amy, we could find common ground, since we had similar views on many things. Of course, I understood that friends wanted the best, but I tried not to build unnecessary illusions. At first, I made excuses, but then I thought, what do I have to lose? In the worst case, I would have a new familiar interlocutor in the best case, and maybe we would really find understanding. We agreed to meet together, a small group, so as not to create awkwardness. The following Saturday, David and Amy invited me and this mysterious stranger to dinner at Amy's favorite restaurant. I was nervous, like a boy before his first date. I was out of the habit of such events. The last time I was on a date was more than 15 years ago, and that was with Sarah. Now the feeling of uncertainty even amused me. I was no longer that naive guy, but I felt the same thrill of anticipation of the unknown. I even chose a new shirt, which I bought after the trip, to feel more confident. By the way, the day before, I even went to the salon and changed my hair. A little my friends said that it suited me. Such little things gave me confidence. I was optimistic, although I did not expect miracles. On the day of the meeting, I was tempted to cancel several times, citing poor health. But each time I stopped myself. Enough hiding. To calm down, I cleaned the apartment, as if the guest was supposed to come to me and not meet at a restaurant. Then I even threw out a few neutral topics for conversation in my head, feeling awkward, like a student before an exam. At the appointed hour, overcoming my excitement, I left the house to meet a new chapter in my life. On the appointed Saturday evening, I arrived at the restaurant a little earlier than everyone else. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. I chose a table in a cozy corner of the room and nervously twirled the menu in my fingers while I waited for the others. A few minutes later, David and Amy arrived, and she was with them. Our stranger was an attractive woman of about 40, with a soft smile and thoughtful gray eyes. She was wearing a blue-green dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and she looked very elegant and feminine. I noticed how confident and at the same time soft she held herself. Michael, meet Katerina, Amy introduced her. Kat, this is the Michael we told you about. It's a pleasure to meet you, Katerina said quietly and politely, extending her hand to me. Her handshake was soft and warm. Likewise, I smiled, hoping to hide the tremor in my voice. We sat down at the table. The first minutes passed a little stiffly. We exchanged routine phrases about the weather, about how difficult it was to find parking near the restaurant. David and Amy tried to diffuse the situation with jokes about our shell rocks, as they nicknamed Katerina and me, hinting that we were too close. When the waiter asked if we wanted champagne, David bluntly said, "Of course, because today our friends are taking their first step towards the Nobel Peace Prize in their personal lives," causing us all to smile and diffusing the tension. Gradually, the tension began to subside. After ordering food and wine, we began to talk. The restaurant was cozy, the soft light of candles on the table, the soft melodic jazz music, and the aroma of fresh food created an almost intimate atmosphere. Outside the windows, the city bustled, but here, in our corner, time seemed to slow down, allowing us to calmly get to know each other. It turned out that Katerina really does read a lot. We even discovered that we liked the same detective author. It was unexpectedly pleasant to find similarities with a near stranger. She perked up when we began to discuss the latest film adaptations of the author's books, and I caught myself thinking that I hadn't seen such genuine enthusiasm for a long time. After the first toast David's to new beginnings, the conversation turned to more personal matters. Amy tactfully led her husband away to dance to live music, leaving us alone. Before leaving, David winked at me as if to say everything was going well, and I smiled gratefully at him, understanding his support. I appreciated the thoughtfulness and at the same time tensed up. Now it was up to me to keep the conversation going. Katerina was the first to touch on the sore subject. Amy said to you recently, went through a divorce. She looked not with pity, but with understanding. Yes, it all ended a couple of months ago, I sighed. It wasn't easy. I know, she nodded quietly. It happened to me a year ago. It was hard, too. We exchanged short, bitter smiles. It turned out that we shared pain, and for some reason that brought us closer. I didn't want to go into the details of Sarah's betrayal, and there was no need to, but I did say a few words about my experience. Katerina shared that her marriage had broken up because she and her husband had grown apart and he had met another woman. Our stories echoed each other. We talked about it quietly, without drama, as if it were a stage we had passed. And, to my surprise, this frankness did not cause pain, but rather brought relief, as if you were talking to someone who truly understood without unnecessary words. By that point, I barely noticed the music or the other customers around me. We drank wine and talked easily, confidentially, like old friends. Katerina turned out to have a great sense of humor. When I told her how I tried to conquer surfing and swallowed half the ocean, she laughed so heartily that the neighboring tables turned to look at us. I noticed how cute dimples appeared on her cheeks when she laughed, and how lively her eyes lit up when she started talking about her favorite topic, and I was happy to make her laugh. At some point, I realized that I felt good, really good. With her, I felt neither tension nor the bitterness of the past, only a lively interest in what she was telling me, and the warmth of her attentive listening to my stories. Time flew by at dinner. David and Amy returned, and the four of us sat for a long time, chatting about everything under the sun. Amy glanced meaningfully at me, then at her friend, and once whispered in my ear, "There, I told you you'll get along," to which I only smiled in response. I caught Amy's satisfied look apparently. Her plan was a success. When we left the restaurant, the evening city was shining with lights. We stopped at the entrance, saying goodbye. David and his wife moved away a little, pretending to discuss something, but I knew they were giving us the opportunity to exchange contacts. "It was very nice to meet you," I told Katerina sincerely. Likewise, she smiled, and this time her smile was warm and calm. "I hope to see you again sometime, if you want." "I want," I blurted out faster than I could think, and then I was embarrassed by my haste. Katerina laughed melodically and good-naturedly. "Then, maybe we can exchange phone numbers." "Come on," I took out my phone, trying to hide the glee that had overcome me. We wrote down each other's numbers. Her name on my phone screen looked somehow cheerful and promising. "I'll call you in a few days, and we'll arrange a meeting," I promised. "I'll wait," she answered softly. Finally, it was time to part ways. We shared an awkward but warm embrace. Was it my imagination, or did her hand linger on my back a little longer than formality required? "Take care of yourself," she said quietly in my ear. "And you," I replied. As she got into the taxi and the car disappeared around the corner, I felt my heart beat faster, but for a happy reason. A pleased David appeared next to me. "So, how do you like it?" I just shook my head with a smile. I seem to have forgotten that it can be done like this, easily and well. My friend put his arm around my shoulders. "It shows. I'm happy for you, buddy." That evening, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, but this time it was pleasant excitement that was the reason. Before falling asleep, I decided to send Katerina a message. "Thank you for a wonderful evening." Almost immediately, a reply came, "Thank you too. Good night." The smiley at the end clearly indicated her good mood. Smiling, I put the phone away. I lay there and thought about Katerina. I remembered her laughter, the sparkle in her gray eyes, her sincerity. I really wanted to get to know her better, and there was no pain or heaviness in this desire, only a bright excitement. I realized that the past no longer had power over me. Yes, anything could be waiting ahead, a new feeling, or just a good friendship, or maybe disappointment. But I was ready to take a risk. I felt a taste for life and love again. It meant that I was healed. For the first time in a long time, I fell asleep with a smile on my face, anticipating what a new day would bring. Exactly 1 year has passed since the day when my old world finally collapsed and began to be built anew. It was a spring day exactly the same as a year ago, when my vague suspicions began to emerge. But now the sunlight seemed brighter, the sky higher. Spring was no longer associated with pain or deception. It had once again become a time of renewal and hope. Today, I was sitting in my small favorite cafe with a cup of hot Americano, rereading the notes in my notebook made on the ocean shore. It seemed as if a whole lifetime had passed since I wrote these lines full of pain and hope. People were hurrying outside the cafe window. The winter sun was glaring on the shop windows, soft music was playing inside, and it smelled of freshly baked goods. I loved this place for its coziness and the opportunity to think calmly. My life is completely different now. Waking up early in the morning, I jog in the nearby park, where the trees rustle with leaves and the morning rays break through the crowns. Then I return to my kitchen, make coffee in a new coffee maker, and enjoy the aroma and taste of every sip. In the evenings, I can read a book or watch a movie that interests me, or just invite friends for a home dinner. My home has become my personal space of freedom and peace. I wake up alone in my cozy apartment, but I am no longer tormented by loneliness. On the contrary, I value my space and independence. I work a lot, meet with friends, go out into nature or to new places on weekends. I have learned to live in the moment without constantly looking back. Sarah, we didn't talk anymore. A few months ago, I received a letter from her, a short one-page letter with apologies and wishes of happiness. She asked for forgiveness and wished me happiness briefly, without details. I looked at these lines for a long time. Was I angry? No. Did I feel sad? Also no. I felt calm. In response, I mentally wished her the same to find her place in life. So we silently said goodbye forever. This silent exchange of good wishes became our final point, and I sincerely hope that she found her way too. I finished my coffee and made a new entry in my notebook. Writing, by the way, was a revelation for me. I continue to keep a diary from time to time, pouring out my thoughts on paper. It helps me understand myself better and move forward without the burden of the unspoken. I wrote that life is unpredictable. You are not to blame for the choice that another person made. I recall the words of the therapist. A year ago, I thought that my happiness was ruined forever, but it turned out that this was the beginning of a new stage where I became stronger, wiser, and kinder to myself. I wrote that forgiveness and time are great things. They heal even the deepest wounds. If I met the Michael I was from last year, I probably wouldn't recognize him. That Michael was full of fears, doubts, and feelings of inadequacy. Today, Michael is confident that no loss can kill his faith in himself. I've become more tolerant of shortcomings, both mine and others, and I've learned not to hold on desperately to what's leaving. I've realized that sometimes letting go is the only way to save yourself. And this isn't selfishness, but a healthy love of life. I still have many goals ahead of me. I recently even signed up for a course I've been thinking about for a long time. I'm studying a new specialty that has always attracted me, but for which I lacked the time and determination. I want to travel to see those corners of the world that I've dreamed of. I want to develop in my work and maybe even change my field to one that truly inspires me. And yes, I'm not afraid to admit it, I want to love and be loved. Now I have a person next to me with whom I feel good. Katerina and I continue to meet slowly, but getting to know each other better every day. She showed me some of her favorite places in the city. We went to an exhibition together that we both dreamed about, and even. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.